Hello, guys. David Vos here. Beautiful day here. Hope you're having a wonderful day where you are. Guys, the other day we were talking about history, the calendar, whether there's these missing years. You heard the theory or the conspiracy theory that there's a missing 1,000 years. Now, there's a lot of stuff that would connect to that theory. You could add to that. I mean, people are talking about the Tartarian theory and the mud flood. And all of this seems to be combined in some huge mega theory. But it isn't just that. It's that we can't, I mean, once you start telling people that you can't trust history in any way, that thousands of years are missing or something, or 1,000 years or anything, then you can't trust history. And then you start thinking, well, what else is screwed up? How can we trust anything? What about the Bible? Was it printed or written in the King James Version in 1611, if there was no 1611? Was it first written in English in 611? We're missing 1,000 years? Well, how are you going to figure that out now? I mean, you got the 325, the Nicene Council, and 300 years later they wrote the British English version that didn't exist in those days. They didn't speak English in the days in, say, 600. They didn't speak English. They didn't speak French. There's no way to clean up this mess if this theory that there's 1,000 years missing wouldn't work that way. But I'm going to show you undeniable evidence that they are not telling you everything. That this isn't just a conspiracy based on some evidence that people found. It looked good, but maybe it's not true, but they did their best. They're just mistaken. It's not like that. Now, I know there's some young people down there in their basement. They get a hold of this theory and they're running with it, and they don't know anything about history. They don't know anything about the Bible. They don't know anything about anything. They're just some young guy in their basement, and they're trying to get some clicks on a video, and they're kind of interested in history. They're young men. They're going to college or whatever. And they start looking into this real briefly. They spend a couple of hours on the YouTube, and they're reading or watching somebody else's conspiracy, and it makes sense. But after all, look at this picture. And I'm going to show you one of the pictures that they're throwing around out there. And they're like, well, I'm convinced, and they do a video on it. And you watch the video and you go, wow, that's got to be true. But nobody's done any real searching. We haven't, you certainly couldn't say that's enough evidence. Just somebody down in their basement kind of repeating some regurgitated facts that somebody else did in another video, that somebody else did in another video, somebody else did in another video about 4 coins that have an eye, and it looks more like an eye than it does a 1, Dave. It's not 1570. It may be an I-570. Therefore, it can't be. It must be 570 and not 1570. You say, well, then that proves it. But I'm going to show you where this isn't just some misinformation, but that this is a lie being spread, just like the flat earth, with someone who now we have proof. David Weiss is a Bavarian, and of this group of individuals like Sitchin, Belenkowski, and others. I mean, look, I just was watching one of my favorite singers. I mentioned it the other day on that walk I took. And I saw YouTube about Tanya Tucker, and I was thinking, oh, well, she sang songs back in the day when I was a young person, and I would hear her songs and brought back some memories. And I love Glenn Campbell, and she was with Glenn Campbell, so I really liked Tanya. But it never crossed my mind that maybe Tanya was promoted into stardom because she was one of the Bavarian sisters. Never crossed my mind. Never thought about that. But then I got to looking, and they were telling the story about how her dad just wouldn't stop trying to. She came in Her dad came into her room one day and said, Tanya, do you want to be a star? Do you want to sing? Can you sing? Because if you can sing, because she was singing, he was like, yeah, you got a good voice. If you want to be a star, I'll make you a star. No matter what I got to do, you'll be a star. Now, they tell you the story like as if this guy was just, he loved his daughter. He was just some guy, just happened to live near Las Vegas. And she tells a story about how they were poor. He made $10 an hour, which was probably in those days fairly decent. And you're thinking, oh yeah, they were just people trying to survive. Little Christian family. And this dad loved his daughter so much, he was willing to just fight for her and work night and day trying to get a demo copy of her songs and taking them to all the radio stations, just fought so hard. And finally, she got her break and became probably the third most popular female singer of all time. In country music. Right below Loretta Lynn and Dolly Parton. And I don't know if she's that much behind them. I mean, those three are huge stars. I heard that Dolly Parton is number 2, but I had also heard she's number 1. So depending on what figures you use, but and then if you use the figure, well, Loretta Lynn's older, so in her day she was bigger. You can use that kind of thing. But anyway, I'm getting off here because I want to be doing this video on these dates. But I'm just letting you know that sometimes we see things that we have no clue as to why they are until we know more about it. Everybody who goes out there and gets famous, they got there because of their mama and their daddy. Tanya Tucker, she's talented. And she really is. I mean, she has a good voice. But she's not much more talented than any other, random person. Lots of people can sing really good. They just don't get the opportunity. So why did she get the opportunity? Well, I started looking at her and I started thinking, yeah, her dad had connections in the music industry. They don't tell you that. I have a pretty good, I was thinking about my favorite singer the other day, John Denver, and then it started to dawn on me. His name was Dusseldorf or something, kind of like Trump, Drumpf. It's from Germany, and his dad was a huge military man. I don't know his rank, but was way up there, like a general. And I thought, well, that never rang a bell to me until I found out that most of the singers back in the 70s and 60s and stuff, their dads were in the military. There was a whole bunch of them that had parents in the military that were way high up in the military. And the reason why is because these people that are way high up in the military didn't get their positions. They're stars. They didn't get that because they were good military people. An ordinary person goes into the military, spends his whole life, maybe 20 years or 40 years, whatever, and he's never going to become 4-star general. They might make officer or something. But these people that are generals or heavyweight boxers, like Vitaly Klitschko, now we find out he's the mayor of Kiev. Oh, really? And how did he get to be the mayor? Well, I guess anybody could become mayor. Especially if you're a heavyweight boxing champion. But then I have to question, why did he even become? In other words, did his parents say, look, what do you want to do when you grow up? He says, I want to be the heavyweight boxing champion. Okay. And so they just roll out the red carpet and they make it possible. Sure, he's got to have some talent. But then again, if you're 6'6" like him, or 6'7" or whatever he was, it wouldn't be that hard. If you trained every day and remember, these guys have all the luxury of spending their entire life for being prepared for these particular jobs that they give them. So, I'm just saying, be very careful what you believe. Investigate deeper. And you'll find, I remember when I was a kid, I thought all these people, I knew kind of in the back of my mind that they made it because of their parents. Like I was saying, this Larry Kudlow on Fox Business. He is the spitting image of Jack Benny. And I know beyond a doubt, I don't need nobody to tell me that he is either the grandson or nephew or something of Jack Benny. And that's why he's so big at Fox News. He owns them. These are billionaire Bavarians that own the whole broadcasting, the whole thing, the whole media outlets, all of them. What it doesn't matter, it's Fox. They pretend to be conservatives. They pretend to be very philosophical and trying to dig in and figure out the truth, like Ben Shapiro. He's debating all of this. We shouldn't have transgenders, and it's like, these Bavarians, they're so logical. We like the way they think. And then you got another Bavarian on the other side debating him that wants all of us to get a sex change. Are they just playing parts? Yes. But anyway, they're also starting theories that it's purposefully diluting our minds. There really isn't as much evidence for these things as they want you to believe. What evidence they give you is usually not true. Back when I was first trying to counter the flat earth thing, I remember how many of these little things they would throw out there that was just ridiculous, absolute lies. Now you don't hear them quite as much because I've been telling people, look, you can't use that argument. It's not true. They used to say, oh yeah, everybody thought the earth was flat until modern times. And then I started, wait a minute, what are you saying? Do you even look it up before you say it? That's not true at all. No one ever in the history of man's ever thought the earth was flat. Until recently, a little group of people down in their basement decided, oh, it's flat. And then they start telling people these lies that, NASA started it. No, NASA didn't start this. He said, wait a minute, didn't Galileo decide that the earth was round, but Copernicus didn't, or Ptolemy, or, somewhere it changed in there, didn't it? The model. Yeah, the model changed a little bit through time. But they always believed that the earth was a globe. Now, there was a time when a certain number of people, thought that the earth was the center. It was a globe, and it was the center, and the sun went around the earth. And then somebody said, oh, no, the earth goes around the sun. Now, sure, that happened. But nobody ever thought the earth was a flat plane. Ever. It's not in any of the ancient scientists or philosophers, Pythagoras or any of these individuals. They all understood and knew that it was a sphere. They did experiments to prove that. But anyway, we're getting off into another point, another theory. But what I'm saying is that they just say things and people start believing them. And it's like there's so many of these theories that if I went out and chased them all down and tried to disprove them all, it wouldn't matter anyway, because you guys are going to believe whatever you want, regardless of the facts. But I'm going to show you very, very quickly here that we're not missing 1,000 years. And it's impossible for that to be so. And I'm going to show you that there's some things that it's like sleight of hands that they're showing you in order to get you to believe in something. And they must know better. At least the person who originally put this information out knew what he was doing, or he's just an idiot. And everybody else is just idiots coming along and following it. And it's confused a lot of people because they can't get around some of these things that they're being shown, but it's only because it's an optical illusion. It's impossible for there to be 1,000 years missing. And let me show you something here. Here is an article. It says, The Mystery of 1,000 Years Missing from Galerio Umberto. This is a big one that's going around. Right there in the picture, you'll see it's like a little, I don't know, it looks like little goblins or statues on top of a building. Well, there's the building in, obviously some years ago, because there looks like a horse and cart, right? There's horses, wagons, and that kind of thing. Trolley cars with wheels, with wagon wheels. So that's pretty old, right? But at least it's not thousands of years old. We can kind of judge that that's in our time frame. We're probably going to say about 1900, right? Or 1890 or something. Well, that's what they're saying. They're saying that it was about 1900. But if you look up at the top above the door, it says Anno 890. See, because the D is 500, the C's are 100, and there's 3 C's. So you have to add 300, 3 C's, to 500, which is the D. That gives you 800. This is a complicated way to write numbers, I know. But this is what the Romans did. It's Roman numerals. So we've got 800, and then there's a X and a C. Well, the C is 100, and you put an X, which is 10, before the C. You got to take 10 off of 100, which is 90. See? So it would be 890. But, so they show you that, and then they show you another picture some years later where there's cars. You see the cars there? So this is modern times, this is cars. And you look up there and they've added an M, which is 1,000. So now it's just not 890, but 1,890. And you're like, well, that proves it to me. Just this one picture there, you know. But there's a couple things I want to point out. Number one, look at that picture and you see that it looks pretty natural. It's not written in black letters, so it helps you see it better. It's just, you can see it because the light's shining. And it looks like it might be real. All right, now let's go back. And if that's the real one, which is the one that looks the realest, doesn't look like it's photoshopped or anything, it says 1,890. All right, no conspiracy. But we go to this other one, and you're like, oh, well, that's an old picture. And everything looks fine, except when you look at the Anno 890 above, it's written kind of in very clearly demarcated letters that look maybe like they're a little touched up. Like somebody went in there with a little touch-up brush and made them a little darker and clearer, more defined, so you can read it. It looks a little bit like Photoshop to me. And but here's what they don't show you. They didn't write dates that way. They didn't write dates in 1,980 normally with Roman numerals, first of all. In the year 1,890, they'd probably be writing in Hindu Arabic script, which is your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So then, if you're going to be writing in Roman numerals, you wouldn't write Anno. So if they were going to write in Roman numerals, which in 1890 we don't know why they would do that, but sometimes just for artistic reasons or to make it look authentic or antique or something, they might do that, right? But if they were going to do that, they wouldn't write Anno, A-N-N-O. That's just, I don't know of any time in history that they ever wrote A-N-N-O before a date of any kind. Now, they would write Anno Domino, A.D. They usually would abbreviate it. But if they were going to write it out, they'd have to write Anno Domino. And then sometimes, depending on when you were in history, it's possible that somebody could have put an I for Isus. But I don't think they would have done that in conjunction with writing AD. You wouldn't need the J or the I for Isos or Jesus. You wouldn't need to add that I or that J. They didn't write that. If they're going to put Anno, they're going to put Domino. Nobody just wrote Anno. And if you're going to write it in Roman numerals, they would put AUC. I know, this is crazy, but they would write AUC, which meant from the days of the beginning of Rome. They didn't start with the days, they didn't start counting time from Christ, from the days of Jesus, until long after. Remember, the church didn't even take over till, I don't know, they had the first council, 325, and they didn't really, become the Holy Roman Empire until years later. There were a couple of dates when they changed a couple of things. And we'll get to that. One of them was, when they started using the Hindu Arabic numerals that we use today, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They didn't use numbers before 1000 AD. They didn't use them before 1200. So anything you're going to find in the Dark Ages, if you're going to have a date, it's not going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 1296 or 1342 or something like that. They wouldn't write that. So any dates that you would find before 1000 or before 1200, like the year 1100 or 900 or 895 or any date, there's no way you're going to find it written with those numbers, 895. They didn't write with those Arabic numerals that we have today. They didn't write those numbers. They wrote Roman numerals. And if they were writing with Roman numerals, they weren't starting from the dates of Christ. Well, now, see, here's the thing. If you go back to the year, I think it's around 500, 520 or something, that's when they started writing AD. Before that, they didn't write AD. They were still using the Roman numerals, of course, until 1200. But at that time, they started adopting, in certain places, the idea of this AD and BC. But they didn't really get going. I mean, they had the idea of it, but they didn't really start doing it until maybe the 8th century. So you might find somebody somewhere who wrote on a map Anu I and then 890, but very unlikely, because the world didn't do that. The world either used, up till 1200, they used Roman numerals. So here we have Roman numerals. But if they're going to use Roman numerals, they wouldn't put Anu. That didn't start till the 9th century in Europe, where this building is. Now, it was invented in 520 or something. We're talking about the Anno Domini. It was invented in the East, but it never became popular or part of architecture or anything like that in Europe until the 9th century, so sometime in the 800s. And they would always add the Domino. They didn't just write Anno. And there's not enough room between Anno and DCCXC to write a D or a or anything else in there. But there's just enough room to write an M. But that doesn't really help, because if you look at the picture with the M, they've got an M and there's still a big space. So this whole thing's got to be photoshopped. Or somebody sandblasted that whole thing down and rewrote those letters all together. So maybe it really was an actual M. Now, let me show you something else. So here's from the Wikipedia, Anno Domini. And it says, the terms Anno Domini AD and before Christ BC are used to label or number years in the Julian and Gregorian calendars. The term Anno Domini is medieval Latin, means the year of the Lord, but it's often presented using our Lord instead of the Lord, taken from the full original phrase Anno Domini Nostri Jesus Christi, which translates to the year of our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, that's a big mouthful. I don't think they would normally write all of that. But the form BC is specific to English, and equivalent abbreviations are used in other languages. The Latin form is ante Christum natum, but is rarely seen. So in that picture there, you see it's Anno Domini. Then they do the Roman numerals. They don't put Anno and then nothing. Just Anno. It's got to have Anno Domini. So we know that there's something wrong with that picture that we saw. But the calendar error is based on the traditionally reckoned year of the conception or birth of Jesus, AD counting years from the start of this epoch, and BC denoting years before the start of the era. There is no year 0. In this scheme, thus, the year 1 AD immediately follows the year 1 BC. This dating system was devised in 525 by Dionysius Exiguus, but was not widely used until the 9th century, up into the 800s, all the way up to the year 900. They didn't even really use it much. So at no time in the first 500 years since Christ would you ever find anywhere in Europe, or pretty much anywhere in the then known world, would you find the letters 890 or 340, Anno 340 in Hindu Arabic numerals that we use today, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They didn't use that. They didn't write it anywhere. So when they show you these dates, let's say there's a date 1290. It's I-290. And they say, well, that's really in the year of Isus 290. They're lying to you. And now I don't know if some of these guys in their basement that's just repeating this stuff knows that they're telling a falsehood. But whoever started this must have known that you cannot write 290 with those Arabic numerals. They didn't use Arabic numerals then. They used the Roman numbers. And the Roman numbers were C, D, X, V, little I's for 1. So the Roman numeral I does represent 1. So if they used a Roman numeral I in front of some Arabic numerals, that would be insanity. They wouldn't put a Roman I, which is also what appears to be mistaken now for some Arabic 1. That's impossible. So if it says 1, or it looks like an I and a 290, it's got to be 1290. Because it's written in Arabic numerals. So that cannot be a Roman I for Isus. So any number after like 1290, 1300, 1400, 1500, 1600, you see any numbers like that, and you're not sure if that's an I or a 1, it's got to be a 1. Because they didn't write 290, 400, they didn't write those numbers in Arabic. If you're going to see a date that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 800, it's going to be written in Roman numerals. That's the only way they wrote them. And you're not going to see AD with an I or Anno by itself. So whenever people show you stuff like this, they're not themselves clear enough on how numbers work and the dating system work to explain any of this to you. Now let me show you something else here. All right, and when did AD begin to be written? And they write, Anno Domini dating was first calculated in 525 and began to be adopted in Western Europe during the 8th century. The numbering of years, so in other words, they're being more specific here. The other one we read, it said until the 9th century, it wasn't actually catching on very well. Well, here they're saying they started it in 520, but they didn't start using it as a Christian way of writing it until the 8th century, but it didn't become prevalent until the 9th century. So then look at this. How did BC and AD get started? The BC AD system was invented by a monk named Dionysius Exiguus, who was trying to establish a Christian chronology. Before his time, one had to use some system more or less tainted with paganism, such as the AUC. Now, when is AUC? What does that mean? It means that you start time from the foundations of Rome, and that happened in 753 BC. Let's say you have a date, AUC 753. And you think, well, that must be after Christ, 750. No. 753 AUC is when Christ was born, because it starts 753 years before Christ, at the foundations of Rome. So the reason I'm telling you this is that none of these dates that we are looking at, that we're being shown, that doesn't have AD specifically or BC, and is using anything other than that, you need to be very careful what you're seeing here. If it just says anno, it's very likely that that's just CGI, that they've manipulated that, because they didn't use that. They would have used AD or Anno Domini. And the idea that somebody used a J or an I for Christ is not well founded either. I'm not saying it's impossible that somebody didn't jot down an I or a J before a number. But that's not how they officially did it. They usually did Anno Domini. They could have written it out longer, in the year of our Lord Christ or something, but it's not something they would do to make a date. Not something they would do if they were going to put a date on a coin or a map, because that's official stamp, an official date, and they didn't use those. Somebody's just... Why would you use a system of dating that nobody's ever heard of? Nobody ever put an I. Well, let's see. They didn't have J's, so why are they putting J's? You got all these people saying, oh, they didn't have J's until recently. Well, then why would you find a J there? And why wouldn't they just use the system that everybody else was using? ADBC. And that did not get prevalent until the 9th century. And it's worse than that, because they didn't even start using the Arabic numerals that we use today, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until 1202. So we could say with absolute certainty that no dates before 1200 could ever be written 290, 370, just anno 890. That isn't possible. I can tell you emphatically, without any hesitation, that picture with that added M is not added. That's the real picture. It's an M. And the one that doesn't have the M and just says anno is a fake. And whoever did that knew what they were doing, and they spread that around, and now we're all believing it. Oh, look at that. We're missing 1,000 years. Why would we do that? We're just seeing this one building, this one picture. Well, then they show you all the coins with the I in front of the numbers, never telling you that they didn't use Arabic numerals like we do today. Nobody's ever telling you any of this. So this is why this is impossible. Now, take a look at this. Here is a picture of Dionysius Exiguus. He was a 6th century Eastern Roman monk born in the Scythia Minor. He was a member of the community of the Scythian monks concentrated in Thomas, a major city of the Scythia Minor. So, he's the guy, he was born in the 6th century, come up with the idea that we should start counting time from Christ. So if that building that says Anno 890 in your mind was real, it would have gone against all norms, because they wouldn't be writing it in anno and then at the same time using Roman numerals. They would use AUC, and then if it's 1890 from 753 BC, now it's only 1140 years or something. So you see how this is not really going to lead us anywhere except for digging in and finding out that you can't just make stuff up. So it says here, Arabic numbers, or more precisely, Hindu Arabic numbers, were invented sometime in the 5th century in India. From India, they spread westwards together with the spread of Islam, reaching the Mediterranean around the 8th century. And then it says, when did the Europeans start using Arabic numbers? Arabic numbers were introduced to Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries via scientific texts imported from Andalusia. So you're not going to find the numbers So we're not going to get any dates from the time that Jesus was born all the way to 1200, somewhere around there, 1200 back. So 290, 340, 560, 780, any of these numbers. You're never going to find those numbers written in the numbers we use today, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Before the year 1200, they only used Roman numerals because it was a Roman world. We didn't start using this 1, 2, 3. This is Arabic numerals. Yeah, the Arabian peoples were very smart. They knew all about astrology. Nobody in Europe knew anything about astrology because they weren't allowed. All of the wisest men in Europe were sitting around a table debating how many angels will fit upon the head of a pin. But in Persia and Africa, in India, they were scientists, they were astrologers, astronomers, and they had scientific theories, they were inventing things. But in Europe, we had the Dark Ages. But it wasn't the Dark Ages in Africa and India. They were enlightened and learning and building big cities. And the Tartarian kingdom was the biggest kingdom in the world, was spread all the way to Mongolia, China, the Americas, everywhere. It was a huge kingdom. They were very advanced. What esoteric advanced wisdom we do have in the West. We talk about the Kabbalah, the Zohar, the Sefer Yetzirah, and all of this Jewish mysticism was before Spain was part of Europe. The Moors were ruling over Spain. So they had the freedom to think at that time. And that's why they were allowed to publish it. But by 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue because now he got his orders from the Vatican City, because now they controlled, Europe controlled Spain, and this is when they got in their boats and went chasing after the real, true pilgrims here in America who were just trying to get away from them. And they went madly dashing after them, trying to murder and wipe out this freedom and constitution we call America. But anyway, I'm going to just leave it there probably because, man, I got so many trains going on. I've had a time just waiting for the trains to go by so I could talk. But I think we put some good information here, and you see why we're coming up with a problem with this theory that all these dates prove that we're missing 1,000 years. It's just not possible, guys. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you have a wonderful day, and may the Lord bless you. See you tomorrow.